So we are live on Facebook and we can begin.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm delighted to be able to moderate this, what I'm sure will be a very interesting discussion on lessons learned from past attempts at intra-Afghan negotiations, particularly from the 1980s and the 1990s between the government of Dr. Najibullah and the Mujahideen in the 1980s, and then between the different Mujahideen factions in the 1990s, and then finally between the Mujahideen government, the Islamic State of Afghanistan, and the Taliban towards the second half of the 1990s. My name is Janan Musazai. I'm the co-founder and vice president of the Heart of Asia Society, a think tank and research institution based in Kabul, Afghanistan. The Heart of Asia Society focuses mainly on Afghanistan's relations with its neighbors and also with the wider region. The Heart of Asia Society currently hosts the longest running Track 2 dialogue series on regional and international support for the Afghan peace process, which was informally launched in late 2019 in Kabul with the participation of participants from the region and also Afghans within Afghanistan, but then formally since April of 2020. And we have hosted 9 sessions so far with the participation of virtually all the key stakeholders in the Afghan peace process, Afghans as well as the participants from the region and from the international community. We are honored to be able to contribute in a small way to the ongoing peace process. And in addition to the dialogues that we host, we also conduct research into topics that are pertinent and important to the ongoing political process. I will introduce our 2 distinguished panelists for our event today. We're very privileged indeed to have Madam Fatima Gilani with us. Madam Gilani is one of Afghanistan's 21 negotiators in the peace talks with the Taliban, bringing decades of relevant knowledge and experience to the negotiating team of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. Madam Gilani was on the commission that drafted the current Afghan constitution in 2003, one of the most progressive national documents in the region. Madam Gilani was also a participant in the 2001 Bonn Conference, the emergency law jirga in 2002 that mandated the establishment of the transitional administration of Afghanistan, and also at the 2004 constitutional law jirga. During the 1980s, she was a spokesperson of the Afghan Mujahideen. From 2004 to 2016, Madam Gilani was president of the Afghan Red Crescent Society, an independent humanitarian organization, where from 2008 until 2016, she was concurrently chairman of its governing board, which is an oversight body she founded, and where she also continues to sit on the board. Madam Gilani chaired the 32nd International Conference of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, their highest statutory meeting, and led the Compliance and Mediation Committee of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies from 2008 to 2011. And during her tenure at the Red Crescent Society, the society played its role as a credible, neutral, and independent national society with wide-ranging and wide-reaching service delivery that catered to those on both sides of the conflict, on the government side and also on the Taliban side. Also during her tenure, she was able to work with her team to provide treatment for children with congenital heart defect, and they managed to save countless lives during that period. 18,000 children at least were treated, and that work continues. Madam Gilani has also received numerous awards, including the first grade Malalai Medal, one of the highest civilian honors in Afghanistan, also Italy's One Woman in Million Award, the Peace by Peace Award from the United States, and the Peace and Friendship Medal from the Iranian Red Crescent Society. Madam Gilani received a master's degree from the Muslim College of London and a bachelor's degree from the National University of Iran. She's fluent in Persian, Pashto, English, and French, and also has working knowledge of Arabic. We are delighted, Madam Gilani, that you were able to join us for this event. Our second panelist for today is Ambassador Farid Zarif, who served as the United Nations Special Representative for Liberia and head of the United Nations mission in Liberia, UNMIL. Before that, Ambassador Zarif was the Special Representative of the Secretary General to Kosovo and head of the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo, UNMIC. He has extensive experience in diplomatic, international, and United Nations affairs. During his diplomatic service, he served in various positions inside and outside Afghanistan, including as permanent representative to the United Nations in New York from 1981 to 1987, as Deputy Foreign Minister of Afghanistan from 1987 to 1989, and as Presidential Advisor on International Affairs from 1989 to 1991, which was the height of the Geneva negotiations all that time ago. He was the longest serving member of the Afghan delegation at the Geneva talks in the 1980s. Having joined the United Nations in 1993, Ambassador Zarif served at the UN headquarters in New York, as well as in political, humanitarian, and peacekeeping missions and operations in Eritrea, Liberia, South Africa, Iraq, and Sudan in various capacities, including as Chief of Section, Director of Division, Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator, and Chief of Staff. He served as Director of the Europe and Latin America Division in the Office of Operations, Department of Peacekeeping Operations from 2010 to 2011. Ambassador Zarif graduated from Kabul University's Faculty of Law and Political Science in 1973. And after graduating with honors from the Afghan Institute of Diplomacy, he studied international relations and diplomacy at Oxford University in the United Kingdom. Ambassador Zarif was born in 1951. He is married and has 2 sons, and I could add grandchildren. We are honored, Ambassador Zarif, that you were able to join us for this event today. We also have our own Mir Ahmad Daimirian, our lead researcher on this research paper, who will be giving us a presentation, which will be followed by a discussion with our panelists. And then in the last section of our event today, we will have a Q&A discussion involving our participants. Before I go to Mir Ahmad for his presentation, I just wanted to say a couple of words about the significance of this historic moment for Afghanistan. We are meeting today at a moment of great daily tragedy and suffering for the people of Afghanistan, at a moment of great uncertainty and fear about the future, particularly among the people of Afghanistan, but also, I must add, a moment where we see at least a small glimmer of hope in terms of the tragedy that the people of Afghanistan have been going through over the past 43 years. We see the continuation of that on a daily basis. Just to highlight a couple of events, on the 30th of April, we had a massive suicide attack in Logar province, very close to Kabul, where at least 30 civilians, most of them high school graduates who were in Logar, in the capital of Logar province, for the university entrance exam, losing their lives, and countless others were injured. On the 8th of May, we had the tragic attack in Kabul against a girls' school, where we now know we lost upwards of 60 innocent school children and more than 150 who were injured. On the 9th of May, just yesterday, we had an incident in Zabul province, again, not far from Kabul, where at least 11 civilians were killed when a civilian bus hit a roadside bomb, and close to 30 were wounded. And just this morning, on the 10th of May, we had another civilian bus hitting a landmine in Parwan province to the north of Kabul, where at least two civilians lost their lives and scores of others were injured. And based on the United Nations Assistance Mission annual report on civilian casualties in Afghanistan in 2020, um, we lost close to 9,000 civilians, or at least 9,000 civilian casualties, 3,035 killed and 5,785 injured. And the, um, the statistics, the statistic or the fact in that UN report, which is deeply concerning, is that there was a sharp increase in civilian casualties in Afghanistan in the fourth quarter of 2020. And obviously the killings, the attacks, the indiscriminate bombings that we have seen over the past few weeks and months attest to the tragic reality that the war in Afghanistan is escalating, violence is increasing, and this is the moment to redouble our efforts for a peaceful resolution, particularly now that we know definitively that the United States is withdrawing militarily from Afghanistan. The onus is on the government of Afghanistan and on the Taliban internally to reach a peaceful settlement. It's also on regional players from Pakistan all the way to all the other next door neighbors and extended neighbors of Afghanistan to provide support and guarantees to a peace agreement in Afghanistan. And then obviously, finally, the onus is on the international community, the United States, its partners, but also the United Nations to support the people of Afghanistan as they seek a solution and a resolution to more than 4 decades of suffering and war. With that, I will invite Mir Ahmad Amirian to give us a brief presentation of the findings of the Heart of Asia Society's report on lessons learned from past attempts at intra-Afghan negotiations. Amirian said?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ambassador Safisa Musazai, for the introduction and also for bringing the very important points about the current developments regarding the peace process and also regarding the civilian casualties in Afghanistan. Maybe it is very important that what's going on today in Afghanistan, we should look back how maybe we could do better to save Afghanistan from what's happening now. I will be presenting a presentation based on the paper which was written by Heart of Asia Society, which is titled The Lessons Learned from the Past Intra-Afghan Peace Negotiations of 1980s and 1990s. The purpose of this paper was to look back to the past intra-Afghan peace negotiations, to look what went wrong and what opportunities Afghanistan lost, and what lessons we can learn for present peace process. Also, I should mention that the method that we used for gathering the data, we used the existing literature and also the in-depth interview. Okay, without any wasting time, I would like to share the screen. Okay. I will be talking about 3 periods, lessons learned from the past peace Afghan negotiations of 3 periods. First, the negotiations that took place between the PDPA governments and the Mujahideen factions. Second, those peace negotiations that took place between various Mujahideen factions. And thirdly, I will wrap up with what happened in the past peace negotiations between the Mujahideen, namely the United Front, which was a political and a military arrangement which was orchestrated by Ahmad Shah Massoud and the Taliban. Okay. On the lessons learned from the peace negotiations between the PDPA governments and the Mujahideen faction, I will focus on the parallels and divergences. There will be a comparison between what was the peace process in the past than the present. Also, I will talk on the failure of peaceful transition of power, on the role of regional and international actors back then, on the peace negotiations among various Mujahideen factions. I will be focusing on the political disputes and the failure of accords and agreements. Also, what compromises and concessions were made between the parties of the conflict at that time. And lastly, the role of mediators at that time. With the peace negotiations between the Taliban and the Mujahideen, I will be talking about the political disagreements, about the failures or the gaps of the negotiations, and also the role of the regional and international actors. With regard to the parallels, first, the peace institutions, what we have currently, the High Council for National Reconciliation. Back then, during PDPA government, particularly Dr. Najibullah's government, we had a National Reconciliation Commission, which was a kind of pioneer for the High Council for National Reconciliation. At some ways, there are some similarities in terms of the leadership of these institutions. Back then, there was a figure by the name of Abdurrahim Atif who led this commission, who in his portfolio, he was reportedly the PDP's ambassador to New Delhi in India, and also he was an MP in Afghan parliament, somehow close to the government, which currently we have also Dr. Abdullah, which is also close to government. We didn't see so far independent views regarding the peace processes from him. So in that sense, we can say that the leadership somehow unilaterally were close to the governments, rather to be somehow someone to be balanced between two warring parties. Second, control over ceasefire by armed opposition groups. In a realistic view, the ceasefires were in both cases, back then and now, the ceasefire were under the control of the armed opposition groups, which in the case of the PDPA, there were Mujahideen who are controlling the ceasefire, which now they are the Taliban who are controlling the ceasefire. They really didn't give up this, just they kept it as a leverage in order to extract more concessions. There was only one exception of Panjshir Truce, which was made in February 1983. That was also facilitated by Soviets. It was signed between Ahmad Shah Massoud and Karmal's government. Not an intra-Afghan negotiation, we can say, but we can characterize it as a facilitation by the Soviets, simply because the Mujahideens, they were unlikely to meet face-to-face with the PDP officials. Maybe said that it will imply that we are acknowledging and recognizing the PDP regime. So it was for 1 year, the ceasefire, it was really effective, but the Mujahideen rejected to extend it for the next year. It was the only ceasefire. Reportedly, the Mujahideen were in a position to make that ceasefire because, but then when they really gradually their military power got more strong, they really denied to make ceasefires with the governments. But on the government part, both in the PDP and also the current republic, ceasefires are shown as a token of showing the willingness for the peace. Client regimes could not succeed defeating the enemy. This is also one of the points which are similar in both cases. Superpowers, domestic resentment is another similarity, and boots on the ground, not a viable policy. The resistance is both in the Mujahideen case and the Taliban, they proved resilient and steadfast. Therefore, both superpowers thought that having the military option is not effective. So on the divergences, the legitimization of armed opposition groups, Mujahideen were not very much legitimized, particularly the narrative by the Soviets saying that if we go and talk to Mujahideen, this would somehow imply that we are talking to people or to groups that we treated them as basmachis and bandits previously. However, the Soviets made some attempt for negotiation, direct negotiations with the Mujahideen, which was very late. For example, Yuli Vorotsov met with the Mujahideen delegation headed by Burhanuddin Rabbani in December 1988 in Taif, Saudi Arabia, which was late. It was more pressured by how the Soviet troops were withdrawing and in the way Massoud forces were attacking them. So they said, okay, let's go and talk to them because somehow. But what the Americans, the United States learned that let's go directly talk to people that they can militarily threat us. Therefore, from the very beginning, they started to talk directly with the armed opposition groups in order to come and talk with the government. Enemies turn into allies. Okay, only in the case of the Doha Agreement, we see that, of course, a political both and a very diplomatic recognition has been given through the Doha Agreement to Taliban versus the Mujahideen that they maybe they were not given that the diplomatic recognition that it's given to the Taliban now. According to the Doha Agreement, the Taliban are supposed to fight against the terrorism in Afghanistan, but there was not a coalition-making agreement between the Soviets and the Mujahideen back then. The nature of patron-client relations, okay, the Soviets just directly installed their client regime. Unlike the Americans or the United States, they supported elected governments. So there is the difference. And also in terms of removing the obstacles to peacemaking efforts, I can say one example in terms of removal of Babra Karmal in May 1986. He was removed simply because Babra Karmal was really resisting on a direct negotiation with Pakistan. Pakistan were rejecting that we don't want to have direct talks with them. So I should also say that how Karmal was removed, it was also the policy by Pakistan. There is a quote from Yaqub Khan in 1982, at the beginning of the Geneva talks, that he said that Karmal, prior to concluding a political agreement, Karmal should go because he was the one who came to Afghanistan on riding the Soviet tanks. So somehow there were pressures to not have Karmal because he's somehow an obstacle and hurdle to making a rapprochement. But in the case of the Republic now, okay, we don't see something like that to pressure, like the KGB pressured Moscow, pressured Karmal to resign. But at least, yeah, they said Ashraf Ghani to be ready to pay the cost for peacemaking. Another the differences is from supporting an insurgent movement to opposing another one. I think it could only be justified by the Cold War. I don't know the Cold War narrative, how they are placed there, but there has been one thing consistent in the U.S. policy in Afghanistan, that back then they also said the right of self-determination, but now they are saying human rights and women rights, something like this. Maybe to some extent they try to support the people and the public Afghan against those in the warring parties. Okay, on the failures for peaceful transition of power, Geneva Accords excluded the Mujahideen, and there is not much to say about this. Maybe if the discussants talk about that, why they were excluded, but it is widely observed as one of the factors to the failure of the peace negotiations, because they were the people on the ground. They had military power and they could threat, therefore why they were excluded. However, I don't know, maybe the lack of diplomatic capability back then to the Mujahideen was a factor. On the other hand, Pakistan rejected to have direct talks with the PDP. The PDP didn't want to give a recognition to the Mujahideen. Maybe it was also one factor to cause sidelining the Mujahideen from the peace negotiations at that time. One thing I should mention that intra-Afghan negotiations during the PDP and the Mujahideen, it was not too much. We have very few examples of that simply because there were too much distrust and didn't. At some points, at some point we had only some clandestine talks between the Mujahideen and the PDP, which was, I don't know, in Tunis and also in by Qaddafi and also in Iraq. I think in 1999 between Hizb and also Najibullah's delegates. So, but we don't have more of those intra-Afghan negotiations. On the American followed Pakistan's Afghan policy. The Americans, the United States, when it comes to the Zahir Shah option and also a neutral government, I think this is a very important point. There was one window of opportunity, the neutral government having the Zahir Shah option because it was favorable for Dr. Najibullah, for Soviets, for these parties. So there was only Pakistan that rejected, and therefore when the Americans were asked that, what do you think about Zahir Shah option, they just referred to Pakistanis. They said that you can ask Pakistanis on that. So we lost that window of opportunity. Maybe a neutral government with Zahir Shah could save Afghanistan from the civil war that we had later on. Okay, prioritization of withdrawal, the Americans just prioritized the withdrawal. When the Soviets asked them for a political settlement or transitional settlement that should come before the withdrawal, just the Americans said, no, you should give a withdrawal timeline for us, timetable. That's very important because the political settlement or transitional settlement can take a lot of time and it will be an indefinite discussion. So they rejected. Also, the statements by Dr. Najibullah in pre and post finalization of the Geneva Accord in Kabul, somehow the assumption was that he was saying that I'm not going to hand over my government to a shadow government, which is in Peshawar and the Mujahideen who were just supported by Pakistan. This also was a factor in making the political solution more difficult. A neutral government, including Zahir Shah, was something that Dr. Najibullah was really favorable for that. Najibullah proposed a lot of major political accommodations. One point very important that both Karmal and Dr. Najibullah, they proposed a lot of major political accommodations to the non-PDP figures that they were not very powerful. They were not from the Mujahideen ranks. So it could not change the game simply because they were giving they were making some appointments of deputy prime ministers, some ministers in the cabinet they were giving, but they were not from the Mujahideen. So it didn't change the game on the battleground. Also, Najibullah consented to give King Zahir Shah the authority to designate the prime minister and also some key ministers in the cabinet. So, but on the other hand, when Zahir Shah really rejected this option, but on the other hand, Pakistan and other Americans were also not in favor of such an option. Okay, in the face of this distrust between Najibullah and Mujahideen, others just they pursued their options, like Soviets started to withdraw, Americans just had the assumption that when the last battalion of the Soviets leave Afghanistan, Najibullah's regime is going to fall down. Okay, the Pakistans also were looking for what to have the Mujahideen in power, and the UN really, particularly Diego Cordovis at that time, he couldn't make some effective efforts at that time because all parties somehow were contributing to make the process more complicated. So in terms of the role of regional and international actors, as I said, US primarily focused on the withdrawal and also for a gradual collapse of Najibullah's government. Pakistan wanted the Mujahideen take over. Iran supported the Mujahideen one way or another way. China reportedly supported arms and training camps for Mujahideen out of fear that Soviet Union is going to encircle China. India, yes, among all of them, India was the country that supported Najibullah. Maybe their strategic interests required that. So on the role of the mediators, the UN role really proved critical in one part. Only the Diego Cordovis really, he made steady, fast, and really solid efforts, shuttling between Washington, Moscow, and Iran, Tehran, Islamabad, and Kabul. He was doing good, and he was also somehow okay. The Soviets wanted a face-saving disengagement anyway. Therefore, they wanted Diego Cordovis to do that for them. He was for the Soviet withdrawal was something I can say that it was a consensus on that. There was a unanimous consensus on that. All parties wanted that. Therefore, it was maybe not very difficult to achieve it. So for the political settlement and transitional settlement, the UN couldn't do very much. Okay, the second part that is focused on the peace negotiation between various Mujahideen factions, unfortunately. During the Mujahideen period, there were a lot of agreements and a lot of accords made, but they were made too constantly in very short amount of time, but they broke more constantly, simply because maybe I will share the reasons why. First, the Rawalpindi Accord, February 1989. The Rawalpindi Accord just created the Afghanistan interim government, but it was very exclusive. It gave a lot of power to particular Mujahideen like Hekmatyar and Sayyaf, but they excluded those others that they had a lot of power, military power, like Jamiat Massoud and Rabbani. Therefore, this exclusiveness created problem, and they just wanted to test their power in Jalalabad and host military campaign that they really they were defeated by the government. So that Rawalpindi Accord just failed there. And we have Peshawar Accord, April 1992. It was successful in a sense that it could bring an interim president, Sabghatullah Mujadidi, for 2 months. But it was also not successful because they gave a prime minister position for Hekmatyar, reportedly, but Hekmatyar was not present there. The Peshawar Accord was signed in a very hasty atmosphere. Just they wanted to fill the vacuum of power in Kabul. The subsequent political agreements were also, they were flawed one way or another, but they couldn't make a lot of changes. Islamabad Accord 1993, Jalalabad Accord 1995. Islamabad Accord, according to this accord, Hekmatyar was appointed as prime minister. He proposed his cabinet, but was rejected later on by Rabbani. So it was really getting difficult. Okay, those in power, what compromises and concessions they made, those factions in power, especially Jamiat Massoud and Rabbani, what compromises they made? They were reluctant to make compromises. One thing I should mention that they were identical to Najibullah, because Najibullah was not very likely to give a way to share power, particularly on those powerful ministries like HOP, Security, the Minister of Defense, and also Minister of Interior. Till the end, he wanted to keep these powerful ministries with himself in all those power sharing, prospective power sharing negotiations. It was also the case with Massoud. And weak factions were pressured militarily to walk away. For example, the party of Wahdat asked Massoud to give him the intelligence department. Massoud just denied that. After that, it followed a brutal conflict between them. So that was role of mediators, facilitators, and back channels. Regional intervention perceived negative by many of those politicians that had stakes or were part of those factions. And the UN failure to create trust and criticism of its envoy toward Mujahideen factions. Particularly Mahmoud Misteri. What Mahmoud Misteri did, unfortunately, at the very end of his mission, an address he made in July 1995 in Stockholm, he said that the government is in the hand of one ethnic Tajiks, so it sparked, many observers reported this very undiplomatic and said that it sparked a lot of critics and skepticism back in the Kabul government, which was run by Jamiats Massoud and Rabbani. They said, "Oh, um, it really made the negotiations, the whole process complicated. Somehow, those in power they really didn't trust it them very much." So last, the lessons learned from the talks between the Mujahideen and Taliban. The initial talks in September 1996, when Kabul rooted out the Massoud forces from Kabul, Massoud met with a delegation of Taliban headed by Abdul Salam Zaif in Bagram, Parwan's Bagram. They talked there. Massoud had a proposal. He proposed that let's make a united military coalition, which was rejected by Mullah Omar. Mullah Omar simply said, "No, I cannot. It's very risky, and I don't have the incentive to do so." And it failed. Another intro-Afghan talk, which was informal, in Charekar, at that time, Massoud just sent his delegations, between the fighters of the Taliban and between the delegation of Massoud. There, Massoud proposed the Taliban to appoint ulama council, and it should be 50-50. It means half of that ulama council we should be able to appoint them. It was also rejected. Maybe the Taliban thought that it might be something, a conspiracy in order to create religious legitimacy for Massoud to regain power in Kabul. So they failed. Okay, what UN did under the UN pressure ulama meeting in Islamabad, 1998, both sides, the Taliban and the United Front, which I also said, United Front, they consented to shape a commission for peace that from both sides, 20 members of ulama will come and they will talk on the prisoner release and also on the ceasefire, they will talk. But after 4 days of talks, they agreed on that. But shortly, the Taliban just rejected. I don't know very much about that, why they rejected. Other negotiations, one very important and one hallmark diplomatic breakthrough or diplomatic event was the Ashgabat Turkmenistan talks in March 1991. Reportedly, they made a lot of breakthroughs here. The Taliban and the United Front delegations, they meet with each other. They agreed to establish a Dawlat-e Mushtarak, which kind of joint state, to have a national unity parliament, to have a national unity judiciary, and to incorporate and integrate all ethnic and linguistic minorities of Afghanistan. Somehow kind of very good and solid agreement in paper at least, but it really failed. Why? Because the United Front said that we want Professor Rabbani to lead the state, the government, but the Taliban said, no, we want Mullah Omar to be the leader of the state. So that was one problem. There were also other flaws in the talks that I will talk about. That talks in the Jeddah facilitated by the OIC in March 2000, it also failed. I think it owed to the military progress that increasingly the Taliban were making. When they made military progress, maybe they were not very incentivized for the peace negotiations, for talks. What they can gain through military, why bother themselves to talk on the table? Okay, what gaps in the negotiations? Lack of third-party guarantees. Okay, what observers said that in the Ashgabat, Turkmenistan, or all those talks between the United Front and the Taliban, there was a lack of third-party mechanism to guarantee, because the Taliban, in the first day they came in Ashgabat, they made some agreements, but in the second day, just they denied. So there was not guarantee. Lack of authority and autonomy in the parties to negotiation. Reportedly, Taliban didn't have a lot of that. Diplomatic breakthroughs. What Massoud did in his in the very last years of the Taliban rule in Afghanistan, he went on all those diplomatically, they really developed versus the Taliban, that the domestic policies and the foreign policies that maybe Osama option was really critical and was really decisive on that, how the Taliban's emirate was getting increasingly isolated. Therefore, there was not a lot of incentive for the Taliban to make political negotiations more. Rule of regional and international actors. Saudi and Pakistan from the beginning, they tried to support in different ways, Pakistan and Saudis, except on the Osama bin Laden option, when the Saudis found that their domestic dissident is given refuge by the Taliban, somehow they were blocked and they stopped their diplomatic presence in Kabul. Except that they tried to support, but other countries, Russia, Iran, Central Asia, and India, they really were critic of the Taliban's pursuit of very radical Islamist policies and its probable spillover to their countries. Therefore, they were again somehow didn't support the Taliban's government there. So several times the Russia and these countries said that there should be ceasefire, but just they asked, but it was not very effective. The UN did its best. The UN did its best. All ulama conference in Islamabad and also the Ishqabat talks, it was mediated and facilitated by the UN envoys and representatives. But unfortunately, okay, we can say they did their best, but it was also futile and proved ineffective. So with that, I will leave there, and maybe for the concluding remarks, we come at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mir Ahmad, for that rather long presentation, but it does throw up a lot of questions and a lot of points that we will take up with our panelists. Without commenting on the presentation, I will go directly to first to Madam Gailani, if I could, to please provide your perspectives on this research, but also based on your own experience. I mean, you were a spokesperson for the Mujahideen, and the past 43 years is living history for yourself. If you could please comment on that period, but also the parallels that you see with what's happening right now. You have around 10 minutes, please.
Okay. The ambassadors, hello, and Mr. David. It was a wonderful presentation, and I had read it before, and especially today, listening to it. And salams from Doha. You rightly said earlier, Ambassador, that is it a little door has opened for peace or not? And is it an opportunity, or should we carry on and just try a military solution? The recent events in Afghanistan, not the horrific ones, where they're all horrific, but the really shocking ones which happened the last few days, let alone that. I mean, the chasing civilians and killing them and aiming them, actually, by itself sometimes give you a doubt that is it going to be peace? Are we going to, should we go towards peace? Should we talk with the Taliban, or we should take the option of continuing the war? Is it really an option? War is an option. If it was, then why didn't we win it before? But we come to this that, okay, let's give peace a chance. And then we go towards this wonderful research that you have done, that why did it fail so many times? And what hope do we have that it should succeed this time? There are lots of theories. I have my own theory. I really believe that the situation is different today. I honestly believe that at that time, the Americans didn't want a peaceful solution. They didn't want a negotiation or a non-military solution. And Pakistan was the same way, and they simply didn't want it. And all these things that lengthy, why there wasn't proper mediation, why the Mujahideen didn't talk directly. In my opinion, there were all reasons that they didn't want, and I mean a diplomatic solution. They didn't want diplomacy and to prevail. So they wanted a military solution, and this is exactly what happened. Why NATO was so silent? Why the Europeans were so silent? At that time, it was a question mark for me that why don't they understand that military solution should not be an option? But now, later, because at that time I was young and I was thinking what is right and what is wrong. But now when I look at it, even Europe was so entangled in the Cold War period that they really everyone wanted the Russians to bleed. Afghanistan and Afghan people were not a factor. They were just instruments of fighting. It was really how to bleed the Soviets from that side, and from the government side. They were also a little toys to play with, I mean, the communist government. And it was the Soviet Union, mighty Soviet Union, fighting the mighty Americans, and the NATO wanted also to win the war through military measures. But today it's different. Today the US wants the peace. Today Europe, NATO, EU really seriously want the peace. Not only the Europeans, they want the peace. They know exactly what they want to know, what kind of peace the people of Afghanistan want. Now it comes to the region and neighbors. I'm not very sure. If had I been sure about them today, Ambassador, I would have told you that, yes, I can see this window a little bit bigger than you thought. It is not a small hole of hope. It is a proper window. This is the thing that gives me doubt. Are they convinced that war in Afghanistan will also be a fire to their own skirts? They know that if Afghanistan is at war, those people that we saw yesterday, suppose they were not Taliban, suppose it was the third devil. Is it what we want? Are our neighbors and region want these kind of people to come live in Afghanistan, and today it will be Afghans, tomorrow, who else? But I come to another thing, another difference between what the Miran said and I am saying it now. What was the role of Afghans in those talks? Nothing at all. Everyone was deciding for them. Everyone was talking on their behalf. But today we have a government. Today we have millions of educated, capable people. Today we have ambassadors like you. We have people that they can decide. Hasn't the time come that we take our own responsibility? All these years, the whole of the last 20 years, any problem was like a goggle of flowers that we kept on putting on people's, other people's, necks. This is the American, because of the Americans this happened, because of Pakistanis this happened, because of the Chinese that happened, Iran is doing that. What do we do? What do we do actually? Have we given to the US, to the UN, to the EU, that this is what we Afghan want, and come and help us? We will convince you that this is the best solution and let's go forward. What is the responsibility of our government for peacemaking? Are they doing it in full, really? Really, they are doing it in full? Are they convinced that it is not a military solution, is not an option, and we have to seek help to get to peace? What is the responsibility of our politicians? Are we going again, as you said earlier, we are going to have our own way, and we know exactly how many times it failed, and we are going to repeat that? Or the time has come that we get united, and for the sake of Afghanistan and Afghan people, we should do it. I'll give you a small story of my own. In 1990, a friend of mine, who was the ambassador of Afghanistan in England and then in India, was my childhood friend, Sarwar, who happened to be the brother-in-law of Dr. Najibullah, then the president of Afghanistan. He approached me, and of course, I didn't want to talk the same way that Ambassador with you, I didn't want to talk. This is the way it was, the norm at that time. But he convinced me, he persisted, and told me, this is an important message that I want you to take to Pirsay, your father. We have destroyed the villages. Do you want to destroy the cities? If you don't want to destroy the cities, so the option is negotiation, not war. And we want you to listen to us, what we are going to offer. So I took this offer to my father. Every single person in Mahaz was against it. Every single person. Only it was me and Siddiq Saljuqi, Mr. Siddiq Saljuqi, who was the head of our political. I spoke to my father and he was convinced. I spoke in the language that Mujahideen would talk, that you owe it to God, you owe it to your people, that you have to go and see if we could save them. And he was convinced. Actually, he was easily convinced. It was the rest that I couldn't convince, but he was the boss, so he said, okay, let's go. We went to Geneva and we had a talk with Dr. Rij. He gave us an offer, which when I took it to the British Foreign Ministry, they said this is a jackpot, and it was a jackpot. We don't have time now to go through it, but it was really allowing half of Afghanistan, the Lower Kandahar, and where it was in our hand, to just keep it and then ask for negotiations. And he was prepared to put down everything and do it. But who you think stopped it? Our American friends, of course, our Pakistani friends, of course, because they didn't want a political solution. It had to be a military solution. That makes it different from then to now. Now everyone wants to have a non-military solution, even those that they are not convinced that they would lose their places, but they wouldn't dare to open their mouths and go against it. That's why I have hope. But we have to take the wheel in our own hand, the Afghans, from the government to the Sapidar Palace, from the presidential palace to Sapidar Palace. Every single politician will have to come with one voice if we are serious about peace. If we are not, whoever does what happened 2 days ago, or 4 days ago, or for so many months, we are as responsible as they are. And I mean it. Sorry. I will stop. I'll stop here, just a few minutes. We keep on saying, is it Taliban? It's Taliban say it's government. Then we say Taliban says someone else sometime. they said. But let's start the negotiations soon. And I'm not calling just on the Afghan government, I'm calling on Taliban also. Is this our country? Is this our future together? If it is, let's start talks soon after Eid and stop what is happening to the people of Afghanistan. And if or when we start, if we are lucky to start this, we must not start without a facilitator or moderator. We will go round and round the same way that we went for the last few months. We, from the Republic side, we are here, sitting here and ready to talk. Let's have Qatar and the UN together to facilitate and do it. Let's not be scared that Qatar has an agenda or this has an agenda or that. In my opinion, these are all excuses. No one in the modern world will take side of wrong. We, the people of Afghanistan, made it very clear what is the peace for us. Inclusive peace, men and women, minorities, a peace which could sustain, and we welcome everyone in this peace. And it is very important that eventually we will have a government for all of us, but a government that one person have one vote and choose that person. If we are not scared of people, let's go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Gilani, for that passionate presentation and for your extremely important points. The context, as you have outlined, is radically different from 35 years ago. The players, a lot of the players today are supporting a peaceful Afghanistan or a peaceful resolution. At least that's what they say in their formal statements, in their formal communiques. But as I think you rightly point out, the onus is primarily on Afghans, on the government and the Taliban. I just wanted to ask you a quick, very, very quick question, because I think this will be central to the peace process before we go to Ambassador Zarif. From your interactions with the Taliban, do you think that they're serious about a political solution?
Well, when you talk to them, yes, I think they know that war is not a solution. But what kind of peace they want, that will come out and that will be solved only and only by negotiations and talks. And we have to have a facilitator and eventually a mediator, because we need a third eye and third party to tell us that what is exactly connect us. Look, the most important thing we have common, our country is common, our religion is common. We claim Islam, they claim Islam. We claim being an Afghan, they too do. This is important to start upon that, but not without negotiators. Yes, there are elements among us, our side of the table, not in the table here, but in our country, that maybe they don't want peace because of their personal reasons. The same way, maybe in their side, they have reasons that they don't want peace. But more importantly, more than Taliban themselves, I'm worried about region. The region could be a huge obstacle and troublemaker and spoiler, in my opinion. This is how I see it.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Zarif, thank you for being so patient with us. I will just come to you and request you to share with us your analysis of what took place 30, 35 years ago, and how you see the context today, the complexities, the opportunities, and the risks in the current peace process. Please. You're on mute. If you could please unmute your microphone.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Musazai. Greetings to all, particularly my co-moderator and panelist, Ms. Fatima Gilani, who I have cherished watching, taking the mantle on behalf of not only women, but on behalf of many downtrodden segments of the Afghan society. It's a pleasure to be with you and with all the other colleagues who have participated. Let me also begin by complimenting Mr. Daimid Young for his commendable effort to put together a good array of knowledge and experience gathered through research in the written literature as well as through interviews that he conducted with many involved parties. It was good education also for me to look at, albeit disagreeing with certain elements of it, but nonetheless good compilation. So I wish him success in this effort. To me, as someone who has been involved very heavily and for extended period of time with the negotiations that led to the Geneva Accords, I can summarize the key elements that are so critical for shaping the character, the nature of the Accords, and also eventually determined its failure. Ms. Gilani talked very eloquently about the desire for peace. And that is at the core of any negotiation. Is there an intent, a genuine commitment to find a political solution to a problem? And that is, of course, naturally founded on the conviction that there is no military solution. And then you opt for the alternative and go for a political solution, either because you know that you cannot achieve the end result, the desired end result through war, or you have a preference for avoiding further bloodshed and you want to reach out and create an accommodating territory for the other parties to join and then find a solution. And then, of course, the objective of such negotiations. If you are just looking at political negotiations as an alternative mean for achieving the same objective that you wanted to achieve through the war, then it's a wrong step forward. Then this is not going to lead to any compromises because you're not starting the talks from that perspective. You want to win what you couldn't achieve through the military on the table of negotiations. And to quote Professor Roger Fisher of the Harvard Negotiations Project, any agreement that leads to the creation of winner and loser is not going to be viable. It's going to fall apart. So that's why one of the key elements in the Geneva Accords was to get what they wanted to achieve through military, but alternatively through negotiations in Geneva. And that was to get rid of the Russians in Afghanistan. As the title of Cordoviz's own book, together with Selig Harrison, talks about, out of Afghanistan. So that means the focus was almost exclusively on getting the Russian troops out of Afghanistan. After keeping them there became less interesting than sending them out. And then, of course, it was under the pressure of the Afghan delegation that elements related to non-interference at large from other sources also got entered into the text. Of course, the Pakistanis were also interested in talking extensively about the return of the 5+ million refugees from Pakistan and neighboring countries back to Afghanistan, which was, of course, something that the Kabul government had no problem accepting. The major flaw there was that there was no mechanism for the purpose of ensuring that the commitments made under the Geneva Accords will be monitored adequately, and a mechanism that would make sure that there is an enforcement of these commitments. For instance, the monitoring of the withdrawal of the troops was very thorough, with large observers coming from the United Nations, from bilateral interested parties to monitor the last Soviet troop crossing the bridge back to the Soviet Union of the time. But on the issue of cessation of interference, closure of the training camps, and the delivery of weapons to the Mujahideen groups was absolutely inadequate. And the first attempt that General Helmand, head of the military observation team, made to one of the training camps in close to Jalalabad was under constant barrage of fire, and that was the end of it. So the first attempt that was made made an example of discouragement to the UN team, and they never attempted it again because the government of Pakistan failed to give assurances that there would be safety and security when they go and inspect the camps. The maps of which the government of Afghanistan had provided close to 130 of them with indication of the exact location, the commanders, the population figure, the type of training provided. All these details were given to the United Nations. But then the first attempt led to failure, and there was no mechanism to fall back on and to make sure that that part of the agreement would be honored. Therefore, we saw a reversal of the intent back towards winning military victory rather than focusing on a political solution. And then, of course, the strategy. What do you aim at? For a good number of years, Cordovez was focusing just on the military withdrawal of the Soviet troops. Without paying attention to the other elements. Only towards the 11th hour, they did attempt to accommodate us because he had the intention of getting this success story for himself and for Perez de Cuellar. And then he hurriedly entered a few phrases in the resolution, in the accords that partly accommodated the views of the Afghan side. So that brings me to the element of mediation role. Impartiality being the key factor there. Next to, of course, full understanding of the context. Diego and probably a whole number of people around him were just listening to the priorities given to them by Washington, as Ms. Gilani mentioned, who was absolutely not interested in a peaceful settlement. They just wanted the Russian out, and they wanted the regime in Kabul to just collapse, without thinking what will be the alternative that will take over and fill the vacuum. They did not prepare themselves. And when I went myself to discreetly engage the senior officials in Washington on behalf of Dr. Najibullah, I was told, why do we think that Washington would have any sympathy, anyone in Washington, to save the neck of your government? The Russians are out there, we're reducing our interest. Anyway, Saddam has attacked Kuwait, and we focus is on getting Saddam out. And if you survive after we have dealt with Saddam Hussein, then come back, we will talk. So there was absolutely no desire to prevent a civil war or a further conflict beyond the withdrawal of the Soviet troops. So mediation has to be impartial, and that was one element that wasn't really in place. And then, of course, full understanding of the context that was also limited to the number of books that they had read, and most of them quite flawed, as Ms. Gilani would confirm, or very biased because of the ideological position of the authors. And then, of course, the approach to a settlement. Would you want to go for the big fish first, or would you want to create foundation for mutual trust? Because over the years, the parties have created so much bitterness to one another that you cannot expect that atmosphere to disappear and to be switched into an atmosphere of hugging and kissing and accommodation. In fact, yeah, for a good number of meetings, you have to really first crack the ice before you could be accepted as an interlocutor. Particularly, it would be a challenging thing for Ms. Gilani, who is now taken seriously, both as representative of the Kabul outfit, as well as a woman. As a woman of specific positions on the side of the principles that are enshrined in the Constitution. So to rebuild that, it is partly the role of the facilitator or the mediator to start creating a foundation for confidence, moving from simple issues on which accord and understanding is easier than the others, and then moving up towards the more critical issues. Unfortunately, most of the discussions on peaceful settlement have been almost exclusively focused on power sharing. Who gets which position? Rarely did they talk about the principles that were involved. What kind of a regime, a system do we want? What kind of a role the civil society will have? How do we guarantee equal right and participation of minorities, of women at large? And how do we want to move ahead with the rebuilding, reconstruction of the country? What system of governance do we choose? Do we want parliamentary system? Do we want presidential system? And what are the primary principles on which a constitution? These are issues that were usually ignored because they were considered to be too critical to talk about. They were focusing on who gets the presidency, who gets the premiership, who gets this ministry or that ministry. And that is why most of these things fell apart, because personnel issues got involved in that, and both in terms of acquiring a post or giving up a post. The other element is the issue of complexity and multiplicity of both external actors and of internal actors. Unfortunately, in Afghanistan, we did not have a single voice, neither on the side of the Mujahideen at that time, nor on the side of the government of that time. People do not talk about the discord within the government because Najib was the spokesperson most of the time. But Najib had to deal with diverse set of opinions on his side. Even he faced a coup d'etat. The only one that the world knows about is the one of Shah Nawaz Tanai, but there were several attempted coups that were never publicized. And of course, the constant battles within political bureau of the party, central committee of the party, and within the government establishment of non-partisan elements and partisan elements within the establishment. And of course, within the media. On the other hand, we had these 7 groups in Peshawar and 4 or 5 in Iran, each one of them having a position, and each one disagreeing with the others. It was Pakistan who tried to bring them together, but only on power sharing, but never ever they came up with a single voice about the future, the vision for Afghanistan, the vision for peaceful settlement and how to engage. That was a big challenge for the Najib government, and also for the United Nations, who to speak to. And that sort of enhanced in a way and complicated for the role of the UN mediator, how to forge sort of a united front or united voice for the Taliban to have a single position. The best they could offer was a transition government that would be neutral, paving the way for a general election where people will decide which way to go. And that failed because some people thought this is not how they will get what they were after. And as a result, neither Pakistan nor the United States, and nor some of the key or strongest Mujahideen parties agreed with it. And Mahaz, headed by the distinguished father of Ms. Gilani, was one of the few who really saw the wisdom of going the path of peace through negotiations. I'm having the same problem as you, Ms. Fatima Gilani. So I think I've already spoken too much, but I'll stop here and take questions in the future. For now, Mr. Musazai, I think we do not have the luxury of allowing ourselves to drift into a state of despair. The odds are very high. There's too many challenges to discourage us. And at times you think that we have lost all the options. We have missed many opportunities, but precisely because of that, we cannot afford falling into a state of despair. We have to press, I am a believer in common sense, and it will prevail eventually. Hopefully there will be a massive pressure from the public, from the silent majority that will force the politicians to either come to their senses or step aside and pave the way for the interest of the entire population of Afghanistan, regardless of their religion, sect, ethnicity, and location, to emerge as the beautiful, colorful mosaic that Afghanistan once upon a time was, to create the ground for the reconstruction of Afghanistan with the help of the international community, but heavily relying on our own resources. And I fully subscribe to what Ms. Gilani said. Now is the time for us to acknowledge our own failures as Afghans and to take responsibility for those failures and move ahead, not to repeat the same mistakes of the past again. But then this cannot be done unless the big shots, like the United States and like the Pakistanis, stop undermining us from behind, as they did in the case of Ms. Gilani's efforts to reach out to Najibullah's government and try to find a peaceful solution. Thank you very much. I stop.
Thank you so much. I mean, those were absolutely central points. I think nobody can disagree with you on, I think, your last point, which is we don't have the luxury of despair, and we don't also have the luxury of time. The American withdrawal, the delayed American withdrawal, is going to be completed by September. So we have around 4 months to at least agree on the principles that you outlined, Ambassador Zarif, that are critical to a peace agreement that would be sustainable. And civil society, Afghan civil society, women's groups, youth groups, they can play a role in defining that vision for a peaceful Afghanistan in the future. On the UN, on the mediator's role, we are lucky to have Ambassador Jean Arnaud as the new personal envoy from the Secretary General, who, as both of you, Ambassador Zarif and Madam Gilani, has been engaged on the peace efforts in Afghanistan going back to the time of the Geneva Accords, and then obviously his role as the SRSG and his experience and knowledge and positive track record on peace processes elsewhere, including in Colombia. So I think we are lucky to have him there as well, and then the role of the civil society. But I wanted to ask you, Ambassador Zarif, before we go to questions from the audience, on the critical role of the region, which you and both Madam Gilani outlined. We have had multiple mechanisms, but limited in terms of the countries that are engaged, that have not produced any concrete results so far on generating a region-wide consensus and support for the peace process in Afghanistan. We have the so-called extended Troika, the United States, Russia, and China, plus Pakistan, which excludes, obviously, these 4 countries have absolutely critical roles in the peace process in Afghanistan, but that format excludes other key countries, the 5 other next door neighbors of Afghanistan. It includes Turkey, it includes India, and also other countries. And we have had the Moscow format hosted by the Russian Federation, and we have we've had other formats as well. We had back in 2014 and 15 and 16, we had the so-called QCG, or Quadrilateral Coordination Group, of China, the United States, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, which also did not deliver anything tangible. How, based on your experience and based on what's been happening so far in the past couple of years, what sort of format do you see, what sort of mechanism do you see as conducive to creating, to building that understanding and consensus at the regional level on a peaceful Afghanistan and on support to the Afghan parties in the negotiations?
Thank you, Ambassador Musazeli. Unfortunately, what we have attempted so far is reduced to half-a-day meeting of senior officials coming from the capitals of these countries. They usually put a certain limit of flexibility to what language they would accept to go into the final resolution of that gathering. Beyond that, they have to go back and refer to their superiors in the capital. So usually they come there with very premeditated views, very specific red lines, and they sit down at the end of the day with a big smile, they take pictures and go back. My opinion is that before you invite these representatives to any format, you need to engage with each one of them separately and extensively and get to the bottom of what is it that they ultimately want to achieve. I think without realizing that, Ambassador Musazeli, any attempt, any solution will not be adequate, because these people are not, these countries, these players are not going to put aside or throw away all these investments that they have done over decades on attaining a certain outcome from Afghanistan. Therefore, you'll have to offer them something that is reasonable in terms of balancing their genuine national legitimate interests with the genuine national reasonable interests of other nations, including Afghanistan. Without coming to that kind of a balance of national interests that are legitimate and acceptable to all, you are not going to force, convince any of these countries to agree to a solution which they will support genuinely and genuinely and determinedly. So let's start with bilateral discussions. Find out the rock bottom position of each one and see what part of this can be accommodated in the larger scheme of things, and then move towards 2 countries together, 3 countries together, eventually bringing the larger confluence of neighbors and probably even the international community for the final blessing and clapping and patting on the back of each other. I hope I've covered part of what you wanted.
No, thank you very much. I'll now go to the questions that some of the questions that we've received from the audience members. We have a question from Pakistan. Salam, is there any substantial shift in Pakistan's stance at all? This is a question from Shandana Humayun from Pakistan. Madam Gilani, do you want to address that question, given the references that you made to Pakistan's role during the Geneva Accords?
Well, hi, Salam Shandana. It is extremely important that Pakistan is involved. We all say that Pakistan is an obstacle, but Pakistan could also be saving lots of things and helping us in many things. We cannot run away from each other. We live next to each other, and we have to be serious about this, what's happening now with peace today in Afghanistan. And I count also on the civil society of Pakistan. Pakistan has a very, very strong civil society, and they are able to talk with their own government and show the government that it is indeed for the sake of both countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan, that there is a peace and a peaceful solution for Afghanistan. Yes, I can see. I mean, recently when we had meetings with China, Russia, Pakistan, and the US. Yes, I saw some changes. Ambassador Sadiq Khan thinks what he said was like exactly what I would say or you would say. So if this is the line, it is hopeful. As Ambassador Zarif said, that we have come to a time that we cannot linger on negative things. We have to go and find anything positive and pursue it and make it happen. So I think that, yes, we should not give up. And I think our government, our foreign minister has to go and convince our neighbors and our region, as well as we, civil society in Afghanistan, should encourage the civil society of those countries, not just Pakistan, but in Iran, in China, or around us in the region, that they can play a very good role, especially women. Women in Afghanistan, the network of Afghan women was fantastic. And I'm sure that they could also help us with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's a comment here from Zia Muballigh about the importance of the role of civil society, which I'll just read. Denying a meaningful role for civil society is one essential missing of all negotiations of fighting groups. In contrast, the talks have been always limited and monopolized for power sharing, exactly the point that you've been making. Does the past experience show that this trend would be an escalating factor of war? Because it legitimizes and encourages power gaining via militarism. Civil society can moderate the agenda of talk, legitimize the talks, and guarantee the implementation of the agreement. So that's fully in line with what both of you have been saying. We have a question from Nazifa Haqpal. Considering the recent heightened violence from both sides, many observers believe that the situation is not ripe for peace talks. And this is obviously, it goes back to what Madam Gilani, you said, and Ambassador Zarif, what you said as well, that you have to have both sides reaching the conclusion that there is no military solution. Both have to agree that they need to come together in a compromise political settlement. Could you expand on what you have already shared with us in terms of whether or not the conditions, now that the Americans are on their way out, we hear positive signals from across the region in terms of support for the peace process. Do you see the situation as ripe or as getting ripe for a political deal between the government and the Taliban, or do we still have a ways to go before we get to that stage? Madam Gilani, do you want to comment on that first?
Yes, I will comment briefly. I don't know why these days when this situation is really, really sad in Afghanistan, it is because of anger or because of frustration, we say that, okay, we can't talk. I mean, if the war could win, it would have won a long time ago. My fear is a few things. One, fraction coming within the government, under the Republic umbrella, that some will get out and say no peace, and they will go and get ready for war. This is my nightmare. And also, imagine if we linger this and we take our time and think about it, and then what if there is a big fraction in Taliban also? And what if some of them will go their own way? Now they are united, yes, but what tomorrow? It didn't happen. So that's why it is very important that we need to put some speed in this talk. And that's why it is important for all of us to start as soon as possible.
Thank you. Ambassador Zarif, do you want to share your thoughts on that question?
Yes, well, thank you. Ripening could have two aspects to it. One is that the war goes into a state of attrition where both parties just lose the hope of winning and changing the status quo. It lingers on and they keep fighting and nothing changes. So that's one situation. The war of attrition gradually sort of leads to the creation of strongholds, and neither party can change that. The other one is gradual rapprochement of a nature that they see the points of views of each other and think that there is a possibility that if we sit down and if we talk, probably we'll be able to create a common ground for ourselves and to spare ourselves and the rest of the population the agony to which we have put them so far. Is that something that's happening? I think part of the answer is yes, the other part is no. The part that's no, I will address first, and that's the question of winning militarily. It seems that most of the analysts believe that the Taliban think that once the Americans have withdrawn and have started denying aerial support to the government of Afghanistan, there would be almost an automatic collapse of the system because the government forces will feel abandoned, and they don't believe that Kabul would be able to provide enough support, so they will start abandoning their positions and join the Taliban. And then in the face of that weakness, the Taliban will be able to expand their territory gradually, as it happened during their takeover of the Mujahideen government. So that scenario still seems to be prevalent amongst the Taliban leadership and commanders as well, maybe more amongst the commanders than the leadership, political leadership of the Taliban. And then the second element of rapprochement, I think that part has happened to an extent. Not necessarily voluntarily, Taliban are abandoning some of their postures and positions of the past, but because of the huge pressure of the international community and the very loud voice of the people of Afghanistan, the civil society organization, the media, the constitution of Afghanistan itself, and the world at large, the European Union and everybody talking about preserving the gains of the past, not rolling back the rights of women and of minorities and all that stuff. So they have seen that in the face of such almost universal voice of support for certain principles, they can't just move in the direction of creating a council of ulama, which means only a few people who have gone to madrasas for a few years, haven't been to any mathematics classes or geography classes or history classes, just reading fiqh and sharia, ruling over Afghanistan in a sort of theological dictatorship. That is something that's not occurring to their mind, that it may not be possible. Therefore, moving in the direction of an accommodation that would allow part of what the West and the majority of the Afghans are now yearning for: peace, security, stability, development, together with democratic rights and freedoms. And they keep saying that we will allow women to enjoy all of their rights under Islamic Sharia. Now, somebody will have to push them a little bit harder and ask them, could you specify that caveat that you're putting? Ms. Gilani can no longer show her hair beyond the scarf because their wives are covered from here to here. And Ms. Gilani is not going to do that. My wife would never, ever accept that. She has never worn a scarf because of Islamic reasons. She is a free woman, professor at the university, a master's degree holder. I'm not going to tell her to accept that kind of outfit only because Taliban will be happy. Absolutely not. I will not be able to do that to any woman, to any person. If I do that voluntarily, it may be out of respect to those who believe, but it's my choice. Nobody can dictate it to me by the law. Now, they know this, and probably they have moved in the direction, okay, we will allow the schools as long as they wear the Islamic hijab and the education system is not against Sharia. So sorry, I've gone too long.
No, extremely important. I mean, one thing is quite clear, which is that on the government side, despite the fact that there are differences, as Madam Gilani pointed out, between the Arg Palace, the Presidential Palace, and the Safedar Palace on the peace plan, there are peace plans from the government side, detailed, comprehensive, very specific. The problem is that the Taliban say that they are prepared for a peaceful settlement, but they have not offered a detailed, specific peace plan. And so how does one ensure that the Taliban um, basically publicly offer their vision and their detailed end state for peace negotiations with the government? Gilani said, is that something, I'm sure that you have been pressing the Taliban to issue their own detailed peace plan. Is that something where you see the
That's why we believe that when we start, inshallah, our next negotiations, I mean talks, we have to talk go straight to the core, which is the future government. And then when negotiation starts and it goes to the core subject, then they have no choice but show us that what they have in their pocket. In the formal conversations and even in the informal conversations, there are a few things that they acknowledge very well. That war is not an option. They acknowledge the importance of education extremely. That education for men and women, they acknowledge that this is extremely important for the future of Afghanistan. They don't deal with us for women in the way that everyone presumed. They talk to us exactly the way they talk to our male colleagues. And sometimes we are more even critical than our male colleagues, and they have been very polite so far. And also importantly, they know and they acknowledge the importance of attracting aid for the future of Afghanistan when we build a common home for both sides. We need help from outside, from big countries like the US, Europe, Australia, or Canada, and all that, Japan, everyone. So this is important because when you acknowledge that you need help from those countries, there are some criteria that you have to keep. This is one thing. And then to Ambassador Zarif, the constitution of Afghanistan is an Islamic constitution. It is in the boundary of Islam. And it is formed by people who are people like Dr. Kamali, who are not just an authority in Afghanistan, they are an authority in the Muslim world. That's why it is very important that we have mediation and we have witnesses to see.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Zarif, any comments on that question? And why the Taliban, do you think, are reluctant to be more specific in their on the political front? Is that because their military commanders on the ground inside Afghanistan, they're in control, or is that because they don't see the time as opportune? One comment that we have been getting about Taliban thinking is that they continue to be skeptical about U.S. withdrawal or about complete U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, arguing that the Americans have already breached the Doha Agreement with the Taliban once by unilaterally delaying the departure date from the 1st of May to the 11th of September, or the end date for the withdrawal of all international forces from Afghanistan, and that they need to maintain their military momentum in Afghanistan in the event that the Americans may further prolong their presence in Afghanistan beyond September. Do you see that as a valid argument? And why do you think are they not offering a detailed peace plan so that people can judge it?
Yes, I think if you compare the public posturing by the political leaders of the Taliban with some of the utterances made by the local commanders, you see there is a little bit of tension, a little bit of difference. None of the commanders have so far spoken about a peaceful settlement. Nobody that is really significant. Usually they keep reiterating what has been always at the top of their agenda, establishment of an Islamic emirate. And that is something that has commonly come from across the areas where their commanders have spoken from. But they are reluctant on the political side, they are reluctant to talk about that now specifically, but they have never said anything that would go against that. They usually say, we don't want to participate in any transition government. We will wait for this period to be over and then we will establish our own government. We just want the current government to be out of the way. And on the belief whether the Americans will leave or not, now they know that the Americans, if they could have changed the situation militarily for good, they would have done it during the past 20 years. And there's no reason to believe that with the much reduced force and power, they will be able to roll that process and trend backwards and change the situation dramatically. And on the other hand, they know that local dynamics in the United States would not permit any government to stay longer than the tolerable thresholds. Already, there is a lot of pressure mounting from the liberal and progressive elements of the Democratic Party on the government to honor the 11th of September, while the Republicans who initiated the Doha process are now pressurizing the government not to abandon Afghanistan. So there is no national unity on whether Afghanistan should be preserved as a backyard for the United States or assisted as a friend in the region, or just to be abandoned to the wolves, whoever they might be. And so that kind of national debate, in my opinion, will gradually move in the direction of dissociation through strengthening the national government to the point of taking over all responsibility and paving the way for the Americans. I believe even if Americans completely withdraw their presence, physical presences of Afghanistan, they might maintain some sort of military engagement from outside, like bases from where they could fire tomahawks and guided missiles at critical moments when there is a danger of collapse of a certain city or a major offensive is prepared by the Taliban against the government positions and locations. So that may continue, but I don't think that it will become tenable for this administration to continue and linger on. Tactically, another 2 weeks, another 4 weeks, that's another story. But to maintain a military presence and be engaged more than they have, I rule it out.
I think it's quite clear that if there's no progress in the peace talks, that the military stalemate will continue. Contrary to the calculations, I think, of the Taliban leadership, Ambassador Zarif, that you also referred to, that once the Americans are out, that they will just roll over and take over the government in Afghanistan. But one thing is also increasingly becoming clear, irrespective of the debate in Washington between the Democrats and the Republicans, the fact is that their influence, the US influence is on the wane in Afghanistan when it comes to the peace process. Is that something, Madam Gilani, that you have observed in sitting in Doha, and an increase in the role of the key regional players?
It is important that we have the key region players But I don't see anything slowing down with the Americans, not at all. They are very much engaged. I mean, just a few days ago, we had meetings and they are pushing and they are constantly in touch with us. One of the things that we earlier spoke about, this is one of the important factors, that the lack of trust that the Taliban have regarding everyone, not just the foreigners, but our government and sometimes even individuals or parties. Very little work has been done to give them. I mean, is it true? This is absolutely true that they have done things which has shocked the people of Afghanistan, but they were hurt too. I mean, for the last 20 years, if they wanted to find one individual Talib, I mean, an entire village would have been bombarded, and they didn't have social media with them. They didn't have all these newspapers or televisions to run and immediately. So they have taken it in heart as if we don't know. Maybe we don't know. I know because I was working in the Red Crescent and I had to cater for those losses and see that. This is very important, that their people should not be forgotten. If we dislike the policy or the values that the Taliban as a government, but we should not forget their people. We should not just refrain from acknowledgement that their people were as hurt as our people, and we are all the same people. We are all the same people of Afghanistan. So whenever something happens, they keep on saying that we got hurt too. Of course they got hurt, but they got hurt out of the sight. And if they got hurt out of the sight, because that site was not allowed there and not by us. So it is a very complicated situation. We need to build trust more with Taliban, and we have to build more trust with the region also. When I say that, on one hand, I say that we should take the responsibility, on the other hand, I talk about the region. Maybe it is a contradiction, but what I mean is that we have to find a way and explain that fair way to our region, to our friends, and also to Taliban. And this has to come with one voice. We should take the responsibility of mending what went wrong before. As you said earlier, this is the first time that you see that those people that are around us and in the world, even if they don't want peace, they cannot dare to say it. And we should seize this opportunity. This is the most important thing for us. We can't open the heart of people that what is in their head and their heart. I don't know, I don't even care. As long as the situation that we have today will lead us to have a fair government, a fair future, a fair common home. This is enough for me. I don't want to go and analyze people that what they are and what they will be doing one day. I don't care.
Thank you. I think we're coming very close to the end of our allotted 2 hours. Ambassador Zarif, do you have any final thoughts you would like to share with us, maybe in a minute or two?
Yes, I think we have to really invest more in engaging Pakistan, both from the side of Afghanistan as well as from the side of well-wishers of Afghanistan, the United States, Soviet Union, Russia, China, and others who really wish peace for Afghanistan will have to reach out to Pakistan, not just for the purpose of twisting its arm to do differently, but also to see if there is a way that Pakistan's this eternal fear of Afghanistan becoming the fifth column of India is addressed, and to see what is the rock bottom position and desire of Pakistan in Afghanistan, short of establishing a client regime. So that could become the basis for discussion, and that will lead Pakistan in the direction of encouraging the Taliban more vehemently, more aggressively in the direction of accommodation that would reflect the consensus of the Afghan society rather than the views of specific madrasa people or of the extremist liberals like myself and Fatima Jan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any final thoughts? Maybe.
From me?
Yes, if you could take a minute.
Yeah, I really said it earlier, but one thing I want to make clear that I see myself as a Muslim, as an Islamist, and I don't want to give the satisfaction to anyone to come and judge that I'm lesser of a Muslim than they are, or a lesser than Afghan than the other people. We, the women of Afghanistan, we proved over and over again that we are a very important part of Afghanistan, and we will be a very important part of Afghanistan. Never in the history of Afghanistan. I come from a generation of before the wars, unlike our two young colleagues today, that they haven't experienced the total peace. I have. I enjoyed my youth. I cherished and I took it for granted, but I'm not going to take it for granted for you and your children. That's why I'm very careful. That's why I don't want to give the custody of my religion to the hand of others, nor the custody of my country in the hand of others. If this country belongs to us and this religion, we have proven it over and over again that we are good Muslims and we will remain good Muslims. Thank you.
I think we couldn't have had a better ending to this really stimulating discussion. I just want to repeat my heartfelt thanks to you, Madam Gilani, to you, Ambassador Zarif, and to the Amir Yansef for his presentation, and particularly to all the participants of this discussion, our audience members from Afghanistan, from the region, and from around the world, for staying with us. And I also want to just say a word of deep thanks to the Royal Government of Norway for the generous support that they have offered to the Heart of Asia Society that has enabled us to carry out our work in support of peace in Afghanistan, including the research that was conducted into lessons learned from past attempts at intra-Afghan negotiations. With that, I wish all of you good health and success. Please stay safe and well. Goodbye.